Hello and welcome everybody to this session. We're very pleased to have with us Suzy Davies, who is the Conservative Senate member for South West Wales. Is that correct, Suzy?
I'm just looking at the subtitling now. I'm not Cindy Davies, I'm Suzy Davies.
You're definitely Suzy Davies.
Yeah, South Wales West, but yeah, that's fine. I represent the area that has both Swansea University and University Trinity St David's in it, so that gives you a bit of an idea about my patch.
Thank you ever so much for agreeing to come to talk to us. We do appreciate this. It's obviously time out of your busy schedule. Just to let everybody know who don't know me, I'm Professor Michael Draper. I'm based in the law school here at the university, and I have the privilege of chairing this session today. What I'd like to do, if I may please, is just to let colleagues know that I have received some questions in advance, which we will take as time allows, and of course we will open up questions to the floor. But before we do that, Suzy is the education spokesperson for the Conservative Party in the Senate, and I'd like to invite Suzy first of all to say a few words about herself, her background, and perhaps her aspirations in relation to education and maybe universities.
Right, okay. Well, thank you, Michael. Maybe I should start off with the scary intelligence that I'm actually a law graduate. So it's up to you to decide whether I made a good fist of it or not. I went to Exeter University to do my degree in law, but I did my postgrad, the LPC, in what was then Uniglam, so it's as part of the University of South Wales now. But I did have a 10-year career gap between that when I worked in the arts. I worked up, I ended up working in the Arts Centre in Aberystwyth before going back to law school to do the LPC, the very first year of it actually. And then after working in sort of domestic violence and family law for a while, I had my own children, and I personally found that too fraught to try and deal with, the kind of subject matter I was dealing with and my children at the same time. So I changed my specialism into property and estate management. So obviously I'm one of the bad fat cat lawyers now, and decided that I would also run for the Senate at more or less the same time. So as a lifelong devolutionist, that was a massive privilege then when I got selected for South Wales West and got in. So I've had 2 terms in the Senate. I won't be going back because I'm not going to get re-elected. It's fairly obvious from that I'm not high enough on the South Wales West list this time round. But while I've been there, I've had portfolios which are culture and heritage, which is ideal for me at the time, social services and education. But I've also served on the Brexit Committee, the Constitutional and Legislative Affairs Committee. I chair the cross-party group on tourism and on women. And I'm also a commissioner at the Senedd, which means I'm sort of on the board of directors of the operational side of running the Welsh Parliament, which is it's apolitical, but I'm responsible for governance and budget on that, which doesn't make me sound very sexy at all, does it? But actually, it's a really important job. In terms of things that I'm doing at the moment, obviously, it's the curriculum bill and holding Welsh Government to account on their decisions across the education field in these extraordinarily difficult times of COVID. And I hope it comes as some sort of reassurance to you, actually, that because that we're in these peculiar times, there's quite a lot of trying to work together without taking away from my ability to hold the government to account if I think they're wrong. But anyone who wants to be nerdy enough to look back through all this, you find me being supportive of Welsh Government when I think they have got it right, and less so when I think they perhaps got it wrong.
I understand. We do appreciate a balanced approach here at Swansea. Are you okay to take some questions if I start with some of the Q&A received in advance? Is that okay, Suzy?
Yeah, by all means.
Right. What I'd like to do is start off with an education and training question, because obviously that is your portfolio. Education and training will be key to the economic recovery in Wales. How important is it that the university retains its academic staff to meet future demands? And should governments be prepared to support the HE sector to ensure continuity?
Well, certainly on that last point, it's a kind of no-brainer, really, isn't it? I don't think there's a a Minister of Education or a Secretary of State for Education who doesn't understand that without our universities, our potential for not just climbing our way out of all this COVID stuff, but actually creating something with Wales, well, it's an obvious, we can't afford to do without you, basically. There is a separate question on what universities might want to be doing as they go forward. And there's two things that I've been thinking about in this area. One is that I am a bit worried that the recommendations of the Reid review to do with quality research haven't been followed through quite as strongly as I personally, if I had the hat on, you'd be getting more Reid recommendations from a Conservative government in Wales than you would under the current regime. But that, I understand that any minister's got different calls to make, so that's her decision. I think we'd be doing a bit more on that. But I also think there's a genuine question about what universities are for the next 50 years. And certainly a big push in the bit of the manifesto I'm putting together is about different routes to excellence, which is certainly not anti-university in any way at all. But it is about asking you to think about, okay, how do you bring through the talents of more people, rather than just yourselves being constrained by people with, the top marks in exams, which of course is going to be a real challenge for you coming up. But this kind of push to having masters and all the rest of it, when actually there might be other things that universities can be doing that bring people through that can't follow a traditional university route. And if there's a two-way convo on this, obviously I've been speaking to Universities Wales about this, but I can imagine that there's quite a lot of teaching staff then within universities who know that they have people coming through that aren't great for their courses, and they're missing people or seeing people actually on courses that are wrong for them, who could be getting so much more at a university if only they had a different way in. So below that university level, I'm looking at ways to create more routes to get to you, and then when they get there, that you're able to offer them ways of being sort of useful to the economy, but also get the self-fulfillment and self-development that they need, that they're maybe not getting because they've been squeezed into a pigeonhole. And so degree apprenticeships is kind of our big one on that. Mm-hmm. Okay, and just to give you some steam, obviously our manifesto isn't public, it's not even ready yet, but I think I've got my way on this about degree apprenticeships, and I've got a separate conversation, well I would have if I were coming back, with some of the professions about how they want to think of things like degree apprenticeships rather than pushing us through an LPC sausage machine, for example.
Okay, thank you. Yes, degree apprenticeships in the law, we currently don't have them in Wales, I know, but they do in England. So I personally am pleased to see that there's some movement here, and you obviously have a commitment to fair and inclusive access to institutions, and obviously fair opportunities for all, which is good to hear.
Oh yeah, before we go on to the next question, I believe in elitism from the point of view that we want people to be the best at whatever it is they're looking at. That's very different from privilege. And so the universities over the last couple of years have done a pretty reasonable job at trying to distinguish between those two and helping those that don't have privilege to actually get the opportunity to be elite.
Yeah, I think we've got a very good track record at Swansea.
Yeah.
So I'll move on to the next question, if I may. What about, I thought the Erasmus scheme was quite interesting here. As you know, Welsh students and apprenticeship scheme trainees are being stopped by the Westminster government from participating in the Erasmus Plus exchange scheme. The aim of this is to attempt to inculcate xenophobia in Welsh students. That's obviously the opinion of the person who asked the question. The Minister of Education is exploring all options to keep our citizens as eligible for the Erasmus Plus scheme, irrespective of what happens in England. Do you support the people of Wales keeping the opportunity of engaging with Erasmus Plus?
Well, there's a couple of things I don't think I'm entirely correct in putting that across just there, but from the point of view, I'll start where I start from, is I thought Erasmus was a great idea. And being, if I tip my head forward, you can see the white. I would love to have had an Erasmus equivalent when I was at that age, particularly as languages were what I did mainly in school before I went on to university. So there are things missing from the Turing scheme. Apprenticeships aren't one of them, because apprenticeships are going to be tied in with further education, and as they are at the moment, and that's the route in for Turing for apprenticeships. Now, the way I look at this is, Europe is great, but there is a world out there, and it's not all Anglophone. So from the point of view of languages, there are other places on the planet that we can be using Turing for to effectively replicate Erasmus, but in places where Arabic is the main language, where Mandarin is the main language, and certainly where South American Spanish is the main language, which we don't have the opportunity to do via Erasmus, except to very circuitous routes at the moment. I'm also quite keen that we reach into parts of developing economies, because part of this is about helping people who either from Wales or train in Wales to get maximum access to the world. And so, there may be people on this call who have a problem with Israel, but I would be very happy to see students training in Wales to go either to Israel or Palestine, to pick up the best of what's there and create those interinstitutional relationships, which, if we're honest, is what Erasmus is based on anyway. It's not just we're sending you to some random university. These are because there are relationships between institutions. Now, the difficulty, I think, for university, of course, is that you don't get the incoming money in a guaranteed way that you're getting with Erasmus. And so I think there is a genuine question about if you can't have Erasmus too, which I think is actually just problematic because of the arrangement with the EU, that there's something that universities themselves do to make sure that those interinstitutional relationships are good enough to get the people to want to come back the other way. And I've got confidence in Welsh universities that they can do that, but not just Welsh universities, Welsh colleges. And if I'm reading this right, there may be other educational institutions that benefit from that as well. I'm here to look for the benefits in Turing for Wales. They may not be the same as Erasmus, but they don't have the limitations either. So as a cup 3/4 full person, that's what I would certainly be doing with unis. And, even though I'm going to be losing my place in the Senedd, I am still quite keen personally to help create any of those relationships, if I'm of use. I may not be, but I hope I am.
Yeah, it's important, I think, that we create opportunities for all students to actually benefit from global connections. I'm going to give you one more question, if I may, from the Q&A that I have, and then I'll open up the floor for some questions from the floor, because I suspect people will want to ask those questions. So the final question I'll give you here, although I think people may be bringing questions in through this function. This is more of a general question, but I'd be interested to see your response to it, given our engagement session. How important are trade union governors to good industrial relations and consequently the success of public public sector organisations? So how important are trade union governors to good industrial relations and consequently the, Jim's just taken that off. he wants to leave that live. Okay, well, maybe one more then. Should Wales accept the GB government's internal market bill or continue to use EU standards as a baseline here and for all imports?
Well, what do you think I'm going to say? I'm a conservative, aren't I? Well, I would, just to add to that, though, I didn't vote to leave the European Union, and even though actually the legal side was the thing that made me more persuaded towards it than anything else. But I don't think it really makes sense for us as a United Kingdom now to veer very far from European standards, because if you're going to want to trade with them through whether deal or no deal, going back a few weeks, that nobody's going to buy a Welsh product unless it meets EU standards. And also, even though it's true that the UK by and large has got stronger standards than the requirements of the EU, I think that's a good thing. I mean, I'm married to a farmer. Our lamb is their happy sheep, basically. And I don't know many farmers who don't take the welfare of their animals into consideration, particularly in Wales, where we've got quite small units. I'm not saying, if I use the word personal relationship when we're talking to sheep, people have stupid ideas, don't they? But actually farmers do feel for their animals. They're not just this is not the same as just making widgets. I suppose the question for me is that when the costs of farming become compromised, which arguably they have been during the last few years under the European Union anyway. You don't necessarily get the cost of milk in particular back at the farm gate, and it tends to be those financial pressures that push farmers into difficult decisions rather than what they want to do. They want to have good standards. Even under an internal market bill, they're going to have to abide by strict regulation anyway. I suppose the worry is, will it stay that strict? And of course, I don't have an answer for that, but I don't see any appetite for making it any less strict at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Suzy. Just to follow up, I've noticed with Q&A from one of the participants that Israel is part of Erasmus Plus, apparently. So there we go. Right. Questions from the floor, I suspect. I'm not quite sure how this is going to work. Is Jim there and perhaps would tell us how questions are going to be taken from the floor?
I'll go with the flow, it's fine.
Hi there, Jim.
Hi. Yep. We can either invite attendees to ask their questions verbally, or we can have questions typed into the Q&A. It's entirely up to who is asking the question. So please feel free to type questions into the Q&A, or raise your hand and we'll call on you to ask them verbally. I want to apologise. I dismissed the question too quickly. I was a bit too quick off the mark. While we're waiting for members to get their questions together, would you like to go back to that question, Michael?
Yeah,
it's over in the dismissed box. Once you've asked it, I'll move it to the answered one. Apologies again for that.
It's okay. Okay, Suzy. So this question is about industrial relations, and it's asking how important are trade union governors to good industrial relations and consequently the success of public sector organisations?
Well, pretty obviously, of course, they're important. I always consider, I've always belonged to either a trade union or my professional body, so that may give you a little bit of steer where I'm from. And I'm also a member of the, I can't remember what the hell are they called, something like the Conservatives trade union movement as well. Critical for me, they're part of the checks and balances of a functioning society. I suppose one of the, I've lived a long time, and so I have lived through periods, and I think trade unions have got it wrong in terms of where they've been trying to seek influence, if you like. But I'm rather hoping we're well past that stage now, and that unions generally are there to provide balance, see both sides of the story, and support their memberships in making sure that they're not screwed over. So yes, obviously, this is why I'm with you today. I could easily have said no, couldn't I? And it's important to me what you think, not least because you're also in the front line as well. So I absolutely no idea really what it feels like to be a day-to-day law lecturer, for example, in somewhere like Swansea University. I can have a guess, but I don't know what it's like. I don't know what your home lives are like and what stresses that's placing on you. And I don't know from personal experience what it's like dealing with students who don't feel either they're getting a good deal or that their mental health is in a mess at the moment, or they're just genuinely worried about the quality of their own work and don't feel that they can get to people. So there's that's why you're important. And that's why, I hope I got a good relationship with the NUS as well, because I'd be a rubbish politician if you don't tell me what's happening in your members' lives.
Exactly. Thank you for that. Let me see what's come up in. Right. Okay.
By the way, I do know about Israel and Erasmus, but it's not true for Palestine, is it?
No, that's very true. Okay. There's one here. Again, slightly off piece, and that I know you're the education spokesman. That if you could take it, I'd be obviously grateful. Do you accept that Brexit and the premiership of Boris Johnson have increased greatly the likelihood of Irish unification and of Scottish independence? And what preparations do you think should be made in Wales regarding the possibility of the ending of the United Kingdom?
Okay, well, you know, that's a massive one for an event like this. It's been phrased in a way that somehow this is all a big Boris Johnson thing. Well, actually, it takes all players to come up with a solution to this, because I recognise that in particular spheres, it's you know, question of interest at the moment. I suppose I've got a bit of a worry that the whole of the next, you know, the upcoming election is going to be seen through this narrative. But when it's which is, I'm not saying this is unimportant, incidentally, I think it is, but I don't think this is at the forefront of people's concerns just at the moment. You know, we're emerging from COVID. People want to know that they've got jobs and functioning hospitals, and they won't have to wait 8 years for a hip operation. But well, not even longer term, sort of behind all that, how the UK hangs together is an important question. And I'm not one of these who tends to wrap myself in the Union Jack just because it's there. I think there are reasons why the UK is something that can work. I suppose one of my concerns would be is, and it's been demonstrated through COVID actually, is right at the beginning of this, when we had our lockdown, all the 4 nations were pretty much doing the same sort of thing, partly because we didn't all know what we were doing. I think that's fair. But it didn't take long for Scotland in particular to start doing things differently. And you can say, you know, hand on heart, well, that's because, of course, they can do things differently. Nobody's stopping them. I'm a big pro-devolutionist. I hope that's the truth. But, you know, even then, there were some suggestions that there was some political motivation behind doing it, just to provoke Boris Johnson into doing something flag-grabby, which, you know, he kind of did, which I think we should have held his nerve a little bit better than that. So looking towards the future, and it's actually how I saw devolution working, if I'm honest, is that, you know, true federalism is very difficult because England is so much bigger than Wales, and until there's appetite in England for divvying it all up a bit, it doesn't have to be the same, it can be mayors. You know, devolution is a flexible concept. Moving further forward is difficult. It needs proper grown-up conversations without agent provocateur sticking the knife in, because obviously the SNP wants independence. You know, if you follow Twitter, there's an awful lot of new interest in independence there. It's not a doorstep issue though, and so trying to describe what's happening in Wales at the moment as pro-independence is also matched by let's abolish the assembly hyper-unionism, and actually the resolution to all is somewhere in the middle, and that's why this needs a bit of time to work through, because this stuff will matter longer term, and it will matter because these governments all need to trust each other. I mean, regardless of whether you think we should have I don't know, a unified prosperity fund, for example, it doesn't matter. At some point governments have got to start trusting each other before they can work together, and that is very much a two-way thing. I mean, from the inside of politics, I'm telling you, that's really important. And it matters a lot about who's in the room. And by that, I don't mean which governments are in the room. I mean by which individual human beings are in the room. There are some politicians from all sides who are much better at this than others. And it's been a sort of source of disappointment to me that David Lidington, he's not a name maybe some of you know, but he was exceptionally good at working with the devolved administrations to get to a position where we could have compromise and a forward look rather than a bickering. Whereas if you have individuals who just, you know, with their individual flags, we're not going to get very far, I'm afraid. I'm not sure that answers the question, but I'm giving you my personal take on it. No,
thank you, it's appreciated. I mean, I did notice myself over the weekend in the newspapers, I think it was in the Times I was reading, there was a poll that there's I think a third of the people polled in Wales were asking for a referendum on independence, allegedly.
Yeah, and another third will be saying let's abolish the assembly if you go to polls. And I mean, these are just articulations of people who are really unhappy with what they've got at the moment, isn't it? So it's coming up. We went through this in 1979 and 1997, both of which I remember really well. Even 1979, because I went out and campaigned for devolution, even though I wasn't old enough to vote, because I thought what we've got now isn't working. There's no sense that what was then a UK government feels like a UK government, and we're kind of getting into that situation again. you know, which gives me no joy saying that. But the UK government needs to look and feel like one. It's kind of not at the moment, which I think might be partly to do with circumstances, you know, COVID focus, rather than thinking, how do we sound to all our country? And, you know, it's kind of reflected in the BBC, isn't it? We hear this one all the time. You know, when the UK BBC talks, it doesn't really seem to understand there's a whole of a UK out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't just mean on politics, but, you know, when did you last hear a story from Hull or Crewe or Devizes? You know, there's stuff happens there as well, not just Manchester and London. There's a kind of metropolitan way that we do the news as well, which obviously doesn't help things.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. It happens in Swansea, it happens in Cardiff, it happens in
Tell me about it.
and Processing as well. Okay, I'll take another question if I may from the Q&A. Right, this was an advanced question, and it is, if you don't mind just dealing with it, because it was given in advance. Again, not on piece. So, should Wales uphold the EU ban on neonicotinoid and food products sprayed with it, or follow England? And I suspect this has got something to do with probably the question in relation to the internal market and rules and regulations adopted from the EU question we had previously, but it's specifically about the EU ban on neonicotinoid and food products.
Yeah, I know this one has come up fairly recently as well, and it's come up much sooner than I anticipated, actually, because part of you know, this transition year is basically to accept the whole of the acquis, isn't it, and basically do European law here until we get a chance to change bits and pieces of it. From memory, we had the right to ban GM foods. And, you know, I don't pretend to know every detail of the internal market bill, but I don't see why we shouldn't have the same right to ban, you know, I can never say it myself, nicotinoids. Is that right? The LTP stuff. Anyway, because, I mean, personally, I think for England that's a mistake as well. You know, if there's an alternative, I mean, what is the UK hoping to gain by not using those anymore? That one is, I mean, I would say just if don't use them. There's no need.
Okay. Thank you. Right. Another question then. What plans do the Welsh Conservatives have in place to promote employment prospects and replace all the jobs lost recently in Wales?
Yeah, it's a massive one, isn't it? This, and again, it's not something that can actually just exist in a vacuum here. The levers that we have in Wales aren't all of them. So obviously there's stuff that has to happen UK end and things as well. But there are, you know, you're asking me kind of to leak bits of the manifesto here, and I can't because it's not been signed off. But you know, I can tell you a little bit of what I put into it. All right, so which does have an economic side to this. So I'll give you a little bit of hint. And the degree apprenticeships is one thing. It's about making sure that because I'm a fan of the new curriculum, although there are still problems with it, is making sure that the skills that come through that and then into either further ed and higher ed, or even the workplace. You know, the workplace is a place to learn as well as have a job. So, you know, that people aren't trapped in places within their workplaces because they're not seen to have talents that are useful to the economy. But if you're talking about strategy, and one of the things that's always really irritated me about Wales, and I'm sorry to say this, is it's about I'm seeing it even now in the city deal. I mean, regardless of whether you think the city deal is a good idea or a bad idea, I think it's a good one. I can't help feeling that Swansea University's got lead in its boots at the moment because we've spent 2.5 years bickering about structures. Now that's the kind of stuff we need to get shot of. We're very reluctant in Wales to trust the private sector, which is effectively what the university is. And by that, I'm not talking about unethical practices. I'm not talking about, you know, people on minimum wages and other people running away with all the cash. It's this, you know, the role of the private sector in the city deal is not high, and yet the whole purpose of them was to try and help the private sector lever the value of the public sector and the other way around. Now we've got a problem if that's the culture we're going to continue in here, because we will just be running around for years to come saying, well, what's the council going to do about this? The council is part of an answer, it's not the whole answer. And I just think there's that, you know, it's kind of I've had a whole lifetime living in this culture. It's really infuriating when you want to get on with stuff. So while I can see that there's a temptation to, you know, to go after your Aston Martins and all the rest of it, we realise, you know, you can see how fragile that is. And that's why I've got actually some enthusiasm for this foundation economy stuff that the current Welsh Government's doing, because we need to have confidence in growing our own. We may not get to a situation, because of our culture again, of a German Mittelstand where we can have people wanting to stay with companies and grow companies rather than leaving them or handing them over to some sort of somebody who takes them over, sweeps them out and then chucks them to one side. But that is hard to do because that's not the mindset we're in. And universities have a big role to play here. This is why, I mean, I know there was a, you know, an unfortunate start with Swansea, but the principle of having universities not only helping with the intellectual capital that we need to promote Wales's ability to be a good economy, you know, to persuade the rest of the world that we're capable of having a strong economy or even specialised. I think you're also part of the answer in the capitalisation of the ideas, because I know that happens to a degree, but then it kind of stops. There's a gap, isn't there, between what everyone's brilliant at and places people can work. And I genuinely think the unis have got a place, not solely, but there's a space there that you need to kind of dominate, I think, along with the private sector. Not least because you will keep the brakes on the bad guys in all that. And to have people prepared to work in a more dynamic and risk-taking economy, you need to have people coming through school prepared to take those risks as well, rather than being scared of everything. And we need enough people prepared to be out there invisible as risk takers. I mean, I'm going to go back to Israel on this one. You know, for them, not failing is not failing. It's just the next step to success. It's a little bit like America, which I know is a really brave thing to throw into a conversation like this. But this idea that things have gone wrong and that's the end of you when you go away is not where we should be. And for that, you need a section of society that looks like business. We don't attract people into Wales because, you know, we need a mix here, don't we, of homegrown and people coming in. If we don't look like the kind of place where you want to be, both in terms of our business and, you know, people like us kind of people. You know, we're not going to get hordes of Japanese people coming in with lots of money if they can't see lots of people living the lives they want to live. That's probably the way to put it. Yeah.
Can I just
it's glorious, but it's poor.
Yeah. Can I just follow up on a point? This link between education and jobs. I mean, there's been a lot of discussion around, you know, degrees being designed for employment prospects, and the question's been asked: where does that leave, for example, arts and humanities, social sciences degrees that don't specifically have a direct route into a specific employment area or job? What's your view?
Yeah, well, you know, sitting here as a law graduate, you know, the presumption was I would go into law. I didn't. I went into theatre, darlings. So this works both ways, right? I think I can understand the concern, and I'm absolutely not interested in any part of our education system becoming a sausage machine. Why would we? But to take, you know, particularly with the emphasis on STEM, I mean, I keep saying, no, it's STEAM to so many people. There is no point having, you know, brilliant people who are brilliant at, you know, inventing the cure to cancer if somebody can't communicate all that. It's part of a bigger picture, isn't it? And if we lose our ability for critical thinking, which is not confined to the sciences, if we lose our ability to communicate ideas, which, you know, often the scientific community isn't that great at, I'm being horribly generalistic here, and if we lose expertise in bringing people along with us for big ideas, we've got a problem. I mean, we had a debate the other day, and you know, I had to say, did you know that there are more medieval history scholars working for MI5 than any other type of graduate? And that's because it's, you know, that's a skill about from minimal and unreliable information being able to come up with ideas that are, you know, in this case about our national security. The skills that come through all these different types of degrees are phenomenal. And, you know, I come across people that try and work for me all the time with politics degrees. I don't tend to choose them. You know, it's a bit like law. Doing a law degree and being a lawyer are quite different things, aren't they?
I agree.
I feel the same about politics.
Yeah, I agree. I'll move back to the question now on the chat function. Right. What parts of the new COVID world are you hoping to keep?
Oh, right, okay. Well, if you'd asked me 6 months ago, I'd have said, oh, this home working stuff's a blast. I love this. I'd kind of gone off that idea. I worked out the other day that since the last beginning of the lockdown, the pre-Christmas one, apart from spending all my life, 18 inches away from people, I've only actually seen 4 human beings, and I'd be rubbish on a desert island. And I'm wondering whether that's not true for everyone as well. I mean, in terms of universities and the way that they teach them, we're talking about an older cohort of learners, really. So, there's probably place for blended learning. Ugh, I hate those words in this, but it's not an equivalent to face-to-face teaching, and it's not an equivalent of living, So I'm not saying it doesn't have a place, but I think it's going to have a limited appeal overall because we have human instincts. I mean, certainly for people younger than the people you deal with, I mean, I think homeschooling is kind of running out of gas fast. People are, apart from, the recognised effect that it's not as good as face-to-face learning anyway, because you can't communicate properly with individuals. The gaps are growing now between those who get on with it as a means of learning and those who either don't or can't because of they haven't got computers and so on. I suppose what we're looking at in the economy committee at the moment, funnily enough, whoever's asked the question, is home working within the general population. And I'm going to I think I'll repeat the same worries about this rush for 30 people to be working at home all the time. Because actually working at home and working remotely are different things. There is a strong argument for saying, if I work for Marks and Spencer's as in admin, I could probably go down to the village hall and do some of this work. I don't have to go all the way into Swansea. But then there's a separate question then, is that lots of people starting that, they become the new centres of commuting. And while it's a pain to commute into the middle of Swansea for some, I live in the middle of Swansea, it's great for me. So if I had to commute out to Forest Park, that would become the new pain. So I don't think it's as straightforward an answer as to say we're going to just live a lot more online. I suppose what it has made us worry about actually is things like public transport. Now, there's a lot of political energy going into active travel and public transport at the moment, and completely understand why actually. But there's still a risk here that whatever we devise instead of cars will itself be very expensive for individuals, I guess, to use, however much subsidy goes into it. So trying to find this balance between a publicly subsidised and much needed public transport system and what people are prepared to pay for it is still a very live question. I think, we're all familiar, aren't we, with the annual report on Boxing Day saying people in the southeast of England are having to pay a fortune on season tickets. So I think trying to get us all into public transport is not necessarily going to work either. I suppose ultimately, so the question is about what do we want our economy to be about in future?
Yeah.
And runs into big centres. It's not great, is it?
Yeah,
there's got to be an alternative to that. Sorry, I'm just going to pull the blind down.
I understand.
But just to finish off on that point, I mean, there are things like business rates, to talk about, the way we are now bit of the Conservative manifesto. Things that are that give advantage to small businesses and less advantage to big out-of-town settlements, that type of thing. That's very today type responses to the policy that you find in the manifesto.
Yeah.
But it's mainly education is the answer, I think. But that's.
I think a lot of people have found that there are costs and liabilities and risks associated with home working, and whilst initially it was a bit of a novel experience, I accept that experience is beginning to wear a bit thin, especially with schools being closed as well.
Well, yeah, don't.
I know. Right, if you're happy to, I've got another question. would you say that the proportional representation electoral system used in Wales has been a success? And would you support a proportional system in Westminster?
Well, I'm living proof that it's not a success this week, but that's mainly to do with how a party selects its candidates, I would say, because of course I've enjoyed the benefits of 2 years of, two terms of serving in Wales as a result of the proportional system. It's a different, it's not complete proportional representation, is it? But it's a form of it. Do you want my personal opinion on this? I think the first past the post system in smaller countries is less easy to justify. In huge countries, I think it probably balances itself all out a little bit. But in somewhere like Wales, you know, we go, well, there's 40 constituencies, 60 members. You know, my view is we need more members, but I appreciate that's unpopular with my party. But, you know, doing the job, you know, the level of scrutiny people in my position are expected to undertake is, you know, 24 hours effectively. So it's not great for us. So my door is not closed on things like STV and all the rest of it. But I think that fits in with that bigger conversation about the Constitution. And, you know, it looks like we've got the opportunity in Wales for those councillors who were brave enough to risk it, to do it at local authority level. Without getting sort of too into the party politics side of this, I think there will be quite a few Labour councillors that are not prepared to do that. So the short answer to the question is no party is going to change anything that disadvantages them electorally.
I'm old enough to remember the single transferable vote option at the time the Liberal Democrats went into coalition with the Conservative government. That was obviously put as a manifesto.
It was AV, wasn't it? Which is not, it was similar. Okay. Same sort of thing, yeah.
But that was rejected by the public. So obviously, I think there needs to be some education of all these different systems before you know, a vote is put to the public again around that as to what the advantages and disadvantages are, because there was an opportunity and unfortunately that was missed. But
yeah, just on that though, I don't think it was just a case of, you know, better the devil you know. It's very easy for us all to be cynical and say, oh, people just vote for their party regardless. But there's still this kind of link with the person as well. I think it varies a little bit from constituency to constituency, but Wales in particular, and actually at a Senedd level as well, the person makes a difference. I mean, like, you know, I mean, I know in my own situation, for example, there are people who have voted for me personally, despite not being Conservatives, because I'm a list member, they can do that. And I'm sure there are people, despite being Conservative, would never vote for me because I'm not that kind of Conservative. I mean, it may be a disappearing link, but I think it's still there. And that was partly, I think, the reason why AV didn't do better. Actually, AV was just a complicated thing to understand either. STV is a bit easier, isn't it? So again, I just don't think it's that simple a question.
Thank you. I can see I've got more questions in. One of the participants has sent in some information, which I think Jim can share with you afterwards, around the Erasmus scheme, references to various PDFs and documents, etc. So hopefully Jim will be able to share those with you after the event. So thank you very much for the colleague to sending those in. Another question, what areas of Welsh business would you be prepared to support and promote?
Big fan of tidal energy. We've got a massive resource, where the hell are we using it? I'm, you know, personally massively disappointed about the Swansea tidal lagoon, and I have no hesitation. All right, I'm not saying it was perfect either, but in terms of the message it sent about how we should be looking forward to energy production in this country, you know, I was very rude to my own government on that one. And I still don't really think they've made the right decision. But it has kind of opened the conversation properly, hasn't it, on how we look at green energy. Partly because I just think it's safer. We shouldn't. There are real risks in relying on oil and gas brought in from less stable countries, just generally, let alone the sort of wastage and cost and you know, even environmental damage caused by that. But that's you know, if I had the magic key to that, that's where I would be putting all our well, not all of it, but putting our next generation energy production investment, which is tied to a degree hydrogen as well. But alongside that, it is energy storage as well. I mean, we've still got a big problem on that. I'm less enthusiastic, as you might have picked up, from onshore wind. Mainly because the current Welsh Government's plan is that, you know, 93% of our renewable energy should come from onshore wind, and I think that's got its own environmental issues as well. And the idea that this is somehow is that people whose communities are affected by big wind farms have buy-in is rubbish. I mean, it's I know there are localized wind farm schemes, and actually quite small wind farm schemes, which are owned by the village, are fine by me. It's these whoppers that are going up everywhere. I mean, they're just the equivalent in a greener way of putting up a steelworks or digging a coal mine, aren't they? But they don't provide the jobs. So I'm a bit where I think that's yesterday's technology and the way it's rolled out. There may be more sensible ways to use it. The other thing I think we're pretty good at is our food, food and drink. It may not sound like a big sector, but you need a sector that's got quality to it to help raise the profile of Wales internationally. And then thirdly, the thing I think we really don't make much of, or we don't do it right, I should say, is our visitor economy. Now, that is not turning the whole of Wales into a playground. It's a sector of the economy that could be bringing more into Wales, but which is deeply undervalued in terms of expertise and type of jobs that it produces. That needs to change. And actually, I think it's Swansea was one, oh, please let me get this right. Swansea was one of the first universities to do degrees in combination with the private sector on this. So it was one of those, you know, it's a degree in its own right, but is orientated towards the economy. And those are, you know, the early and easy wins, I think. But that is not to say that our universities don't have a role in finding the next big thing. That's why I'm keen on the QR bit, you know, going back to where I started, to make sure that we're part of any of those developments, not always playing catch up. I mean, I think the work that's going on in SAMI at the moment is pretty important, not only because of you know, we've got a steel industry which remains, you know, significant as an employer in our part of the country, but as a country that doesn't produce its own steel, that to me is like a country that doesn't produce its own energy. You know, there are some elements of an economy that are so fundamental, we'd be very worried to lose them. Having said that, steel is not just about steel, it's about materials. And that's again why I want this, you know, the Steel Innovation Centre to come to probably Jersey Marine, I think, as part of the city deal, because for me that's just part of it's part of a much bigger picture on tomorrow's materials, which need to be cleaner and greener, obviously, and not just turn into landfill and of their own right.
Yeah, I mean, this idea of a balanced economy, I think, is important. I think we've all seen, haven't we, that the impact of COVID on the hospitality sector. I know you're talking about tourism as being an important ingredient.
The whole thing, yeah. The
whole thing. But obviously, COVID has taught us, I think, if nothing else, that certain sectors of the economy are subject to very specific shocks, or can be. And I think education, higher education, is an important part of that Welsh economy. We've got some world-class universities in Wales, Swansea being one, Bangor, Cardiff. And I think they're important. And you talk about anchor tenants in as you know, in shopping centres. We're certainly anchor for the civic mission. We're anchor for public sector and private sector jobs, with that blend, as you said earlier on, in terms of how universities now work with the private sector and with industries, etc., and not just within Wales, but also within the UK and globally. And it's making sure how we support that. Because so many jobs do depend upon what we do here in Swansea, and also in Cardiff and Bangor and Aberystwyth and Glyndŵr and other institutions within Wales.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I know we talk about higher ed particularly today, but all these education institutions are part of an ecosystem. That if one of them went, there'd be a sense of collapse in the others as well. You know, I mean, I will talk to people who will say, you know, colleges are parking their tanks on your lawn, and then colleges will say that the unis are parking their tanks on their lawn. there's plenty of lawn for you both. What there isn't space for is one of you losing your lawns altogether. Sorry to squeeze this metaphor. So there's, I don't actually worry that, you know, we will lose these sectors, but I'm worried that you might lose visibility in what the world is looking for. And so I just repeat that point about QR then, because, you know, you can be and I think it is partnering, isn't it, with universities all over the world. And, you know, tutoring may just make you extra contacts in the course of that. I mean, that's one tiny little sliver, isn't it? I mean, this takes governments working with governments as well.
Yeah. I have two questions here, which are probably linked, so I'll put them both in together. One is, thank you for being candid about your Senate election plans. What are you planning to do next? And the other one is a bit more, I am sorry to hear that Suzy is not on the Conservatives list for the next election. Is this due to the pro-Trump, pro-UKIP changes in the Conservative Party?
No. And, you know, I actually am still on the list. I'm just not on a winnable position. So I'm still up for election in that sense. What I do want to take issue with those last comments, though, the Conservative Party, either this side or the other side of the Severn Bridge, has not become some sort of crazy pro-Trump stuff, with one exception. And, you know, we have got Trump supporters in the Conservative Party. That should come as no surprise. But with one exception, I don't know one public Conservative who didn't hang out the flags when Joe Biden got in. We all thought Trump was a nutcase, basically. I could say more. It was disappointing when social media started it, when mainstream media were happy to pick up on some sort of pro-Trump, let's go storm the Capitol type of narrative. That is not where we are, and it's particularly not where we are in Wales. As I say, we've got our members who are like that, but not many. The rest of us are normal human beings, centre-right, who just got a slightly different idea of how to do things in the current government. That's important to get that across, because between what we talked about earlier, you know, all the independents and all the abolish, the centre ground is still huge. It's still the biggest place. One of the things that's kind of annoyed me a little bit is, because that's the narrative, it's allowed some of the extremes on either side of the spectrum on this to come into the fore with their voices. I think it started during Brexit, but I'm going to say, if the BBC hadn't given Nigel Farage loads and loads of exposure, would our lot who like Brexit really felt confident enough to push it as an agenda? I don't know. Everyone's to blame, she says. I really want to just get that across. There is no change to our direction in this. Pro-devolution, genuine question about whether it's working properly at the moment and whether the powers are being used to best effect. But those of my colleagues who are, not a fan of it, they're not the majority. They're really not. I know I see polls saying this sometimes, but then I say polls saying the majority want independence. Depends who you ask, isn't it?
And when you ask it.
Well, and when you ask it, yeah.
Yeah. I don't have any further questions to ask from the Q&A function. I can see we're at 13:54, so we've probably got 5 minutes left. I'm not sure if Jim wants to come in at this point or say anything.
Sorry, just remembered I didn't finish that. No, I wasn't pushed locally, by the way. I'm not going to go through the arcane nonsense that is our selection system, but it is quite easy to game the system. So somebody who wanted the job, my job, just managed, did it basically. Very localized issue. Is there any chance of it being you up the higher up the list at some point, or is this a done deal now? Well, unless 4 people throw themselves under a bus, it's not going to be me. I'm afraid. Okay. I do have one more question that's just come in. Just picking up on the points you're just making. Rees-Mogg said he would vote for Trump, and Johnson said he was worthy of the Nobel Peace Prize. That's 2 whole people. Sorry? That's 2 whole people. I mean, I think you probably picked up that Jacob Rees-Mogg and I are not on the same bits of the spectrum of the Conservative Party. I know he was an interesting character during Brexit because he was a totem, if you like. But we haven't really heard that much of him since, have we? And that gives you some indication of that his influence was suitable for a period of time. The other thing I think I might mention here, actually, is a lot of people, not candidates, a lot of the new intake for the Conservatives at the last, the December election last year, weren't really expecting to get in. They took seats that didn't look winnable at the time.
Mm.
They're not your greasy pollers. They're really useful because they hold their own party to account a lot, and on the lines of, hang on, we got our seats on the basis of this. You better stick to this, mate. Because actually, we don't want to be prime minister. We're community champions, which is why we stood. Don't make things difficult for us. And I think they've had a bit of a rude awakening on that because, everyone thinks politics is greasy pole, don't they?
Yeah.
And actually, you've got 600 MPs. I defy you to name me more than 40. All those others are your, just hardworking MPs of all persuasions who get on, do their stuff for their communities, realise that they're lobby fodder in terms of legislation and so forth, except with a few, well, actually, we've seen some of the new intake saying, hang on, we're not having this with the school lunches recently.
Mm.
Good on them, I say.
Yeah, and hence the importance of the select committee approach, I think, within the UK government. This first past the post system and presidential style government does not go down well with people generally, does it?
No, and but that's the same in the Senate as well. I mean, the quirk of our system with us is that obviously that we all our equivalents of select committees have a majority of Labour members on them to reflect the balance in the Senate. There are a lot of independent-minded Labour people there who kind of stick it to the government in reports, but of course they're all whipped then, and certainly in terms of legislation, to vote in a particular way, regardless of what they said. And that's, that'll be the same for some of mine down in London, won't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I see them doing it like that behind their backs in Cardiff.
And that is the realities of party system politics, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's 13:57. I think this is supposed to be for 60 minutes, so I'm just going to wrap up and say, Suzy, it's been a pleasure to chair this particular session with you and to ask you your questions and for you to listen to your answers, which have been honest and full. We do appreciate that, and we do appreciate you all giving your time up to come and talk to us on this particular session. I think, obviously a few people in chat are going to be sorry to see you go, but it sounds of it as well. So I'd just like to echo that. I don't know you, but I've enjoyed talking with you. Jim, are you going to come in at this point and terminate the session, or is that going to be it all, or what?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much, both. Just like to echo Michael's thanks. Thank you very much, Suzy. It was a great session. Really appreciate your time. But yeah, that's it.
You're welcome. Send any more questions through if you want. Particularly about universities and their place in our thinking, rather than my my obituary, because I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet.